Thank you for joining us today. This presentation is one of several presentations that are being offered as part of Open Education Week. We invite you to attend the other presentations this week. You can see a link to the library news blog. It has information in as well as the links to the other presentations in the chat. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to the ISU Library's YouTube channel for future viewing. Following the presentation, we'll have a question and answer period where you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you'd like to post a question in the chat, I can read those questions during the question and answer session portion of the presentation. Our presenter can respond to those questions at that time. With that out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Jason Wright. Jason Wright is a visiting associate professor of computer science at Idaho State University. Before joining ISU, Jason formed his own company, and through that company worked on 3 different DARPA projects. Jason has also worked for the Idaho National Laboratory Reverse Engineering Embedded Systems to expose vulnerabilities and work with various vendors to see that those vulnerabilities are addressed in subsequent revisions of their products. His primary research interests include cybersecurity, with particular focus on hardening of operating systems and network protocols. Thank you for being with us today, Jason, and we look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, and thank you all for attending. I'm actually kind of excited about this. Well, actually, I'll get into a little bit more about who I am, but that was a great introduction. What I was going to talk about for the most part today is how we've incorporated open educational resources into the introductory computer science courses. I do use open resources in my higher level classes as well, but I wanted to concentrate on what we do at the introductory level in computer science. So with that, let's see, I've only been a teacher, a professor for about 3.5 years now. I am new to the whole academic world, and it has been a culture shock to an extent. A good culture shock, though. I absolutely love this profession. Before that, I worked in industry. I founded my own company. I worked on, over my lifespan, I've worked on 4 different programs from the Department of Defense, specifically DARPA. It's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And for Thought Networks, I bid on and won 3 different contracts during the lifetime of that company. Before that, I worked at Idaho National Laboratory, but before that, I worked on a project called OpenBSD. OpenBSD is an open source operating system. So it is an operating system like Windows or Linux or whatever, but its primary goal, its primary claim to fame is software security and its openness. And I think that open source background lent itself well when I heard, I didn't know what OER was until I showed up at the university, and I think I saw a post from Ryan Randall or one of those folks about this open educational resources kind of initiative at ISU, and having open source software, knowing and having participated in the open source software movement. The move into open educational resources was very natural for me. So when I started at ISU, our introductory computer science course, CS 1181, it is a general it meets a general ed requirement. I think it's GEM Area 7, critical thinking. And the course prep that I was given for it was traditional textbook with lecture, and then they had 10 or so projects over the entire semester. And that was it as far as stuff to grade and stuff for the students to do. So they had to show up for lectures. We used a textbook. I referenced the textbook pretty often, and they had to do projects based on our textbook. But I was kind of given free rein in rewriting that course, as long as I met the learning objectives. So I kind of set out the kind of 4 goals. I wanted to use open materials if I could find some that were any good. So it's no use in having bad materials. That's frustrating for the students. That's frustrating for the professors too. So if I could find something good, I'd use it. I also wanted to be able to measure whether the students were doing the reading beforehand. I wanted to kind of nudge them in the direction of not having a monologue during class. I didn't want to quite go all the way towards a flipped classroom, which I had no familiarity with until about 3 years ago when I started this whole thing and started reading about it. But I didn't want to go that model completely. The other complaint that I got on my first semester teaching was we had a small number of projects, relatively speaking. There were 9 to 10 total throughout the semester, and there wasn't enough kind of reinforcement learning in the class. So I actually had a student complain that there wasn't enough homework, which was I never expected to get that as a complaint. And listening to that complaint, I said, okay, so how do I add more homework that I don't have to grade? So, and I also wanted to reuse some of our larger projects as part of the reinforcement as well. So I didn't want to completely ditch that idea. I wanted to maintain it. Luckily, if I could find a good open materials, I could adapt our older, larger projects. We've got a pretty good library of them, and I could just adapt them to the material that we're covering in the text. So I wasn't at all worried about D. That's easy. But the question was how to do A and B. So luckily, I found this website called Runestone Academy, and I'll actually demo it here in just a moment. But the Runestone Academy website hosts 20 or 30 or so different textbooks, and it has both integrated questions that are integrated as basically they follow along with the textbook, and it has the ability to track whether the students have read the materials. Now, its method for measuring whether they read it or not is whether they brought it up. And for reading assignments, when you give a question as a part, or when you assign a section, it also assigns all of the questions in that section. And it doesn't grade them on whether they get it correct or not. It grades them based on whether they interacted with it or not. So the idea there is I could track whether the students are engaging with the text without penalizing them for not getting the material, because the idea is to have them do pre-reading before they show up. So I made it, I think 5% of their entire grade was whether they did the reading or assignments. So it's not insignificant, but it's also not going to kill them if they don't bother. Or if they forget 1, 2, or even 5 assignments, it's not going to kill them. You can still get an A and not do any of the reading assignments, which was fine. If you didn't need to do it, don't. Okay, we can also with Runestone include automatically graded assignments, but it's really clunky. And if you're curious about Runestone, I'll leave a link here, and I'm sure I can make the slides available. If not, it's Runestone, not Academy. It's not hard to find. The other thing I'll say about Runestone is that it will pass grades back and forth directly to Moodle and presumably to Canvas as well. We'll see. I haven't tried it yet with Canvas, but it uses an interface called LTI, which is the Learning Toolkit interface, which is fairly standard, if brain damaged, standard for passing grades back and forth between online tools. So let me show you what Runestone actually looks like. Adjust my share. So I want to share browser. Okay. So you are seeing my browser, is that correct? Let's hope so. Let's see. Oh. Let's go. So the textbook we use in our intro computer science class is How to Think Like a Computer Scientist C++ edition. And it's hosted here on the Runestone platform. And all the text is laid out. And the one thing I like about this particular textbook is each of the chapters is very, very bite-sized. This particular one doesn't have any integrated exercises. It's just information about it. So I can click through, and I'll get to this one, which does have some integrated questions. And as students complete these, it marks them off and it retains their answers. So even if they have to retake the course, it will retain their answers from the previous time. So they don't have to waste time necessarily redoing what the work that if they've already done with the textbook. And I can create more questions and associate them with the chapters as well. And it's got both short answer, multiple response, matching type questions. It also has, oh, I forget what they're called, where everything's mixed up and you have to put it right back in the order. I'm drawing a blank on what those type questions are called, but not going to worry about it. But I can set up classes and assignments. Like what I do in this particular class is there's an assignment for every week, and it essentially maps to chapters in this textbook. And I only use the reading assignments. And for a reading assignment, they have to do all of the kind of integrated questions and actually flip through the chapters to get full credit. And it will give them partial credit if they only look at the first half or whatever. It will give them partial credit, but they don't have to necessarily even get the questions correct. They just have to guess at an answer. Because getting the answer correct is not, that's what I'm hoping to reinforce in the classroom. Okay, and the interface for Runestone classes is a little clunky. It will allow you to create custom problems and even do automatically graded problems, but the interface is less than ideal. So I think I've solved problem A, which was find a good open source text. This text is pretty good for an introductory computer science course. And I wanted to provide some way of measuring whether they're interacting with it. So I've solved A and B, but I wasn't happy with this as solving C, which is small automatically graded assignments. For that, I found another piece of software. So Runestone is hosted in its own place. They run based on donations. And yeah, they run based on donations. And at some point, I'm hoping to get our computer science department to actually send them some money because we do get a lot of value out of this textbook. But for the problem of having small automatically graded problems, I found some software called Prairie Learn. Let me switch to. So Prairie Learn has, the software itself is open source, and I can create custom assignments, and it's automatically graded. Let me just show you what it looks like. So this is an example of a question in Prairie Learn. And this one, I can get, this one's one that we custom wrote. And when writing a question, I have to write both, the stuff you see, write a function called square area that takes the length of a side, blah, blah, blah. I have to write that text. And then I also have to write code that will take what they write and test it. So this one's actually pretty easy. So it's just 3 lines of code. Compute the area of a square is the square of the length of one of the sides. And when I hit save and grade, it actually takes that code, compiles it, and then checks to make sure that what their implementation works correctly. So it was tested with the value 72. Oops. It's tested with the value of 72, which means it should return 5184. I'm not going to check the math, but I'm pretty sure that 72 squared is 5184. And I was able to borrow one of our undergrad teaching assistants or undergraduate graders. I was able to steal him for a semester And he helped me write about 50 of these very short problems that we can assign to students and have them automatically graded. So it's a way of giving more homework, giving more practice, and I don't have to grade it. So I see that as a win. The lazy in me comes out. Let me get back to my presentation and the slideshow. Make sure I'm sharing the slideshow. Yep. Okay. All right, I want to go back to one thing about open materials on Runestone. So there were some problems with the textbook when we first started using it, and it's completely open. The source code that makes up the book itself was open, and I started submitting patches, and the patches weren't getting integrated. So I went to the head of the Runestone Academy website and said, hey, I'm submitting these patches, but they're not getting integrated into the tree. What's going on? And he said, yeah, oh yeah, that book, it's not getting the attention it needs. The maintainer for it's kind of walked away. And I said, well, I could maintain it if you want. I'd love to see these patches integrated. And well, I'm now the editor for that book. So be careful, if you touch it, you may own it. That was my case here. So now so we fixed, I don't know, a couple hundred, but it would be everything from little typos to problems with the integrated problems in the textbook. But over that first semester, it was fascinating having students working ahead. I had a couple of students who worked ahead in the book so that they could send me, hey, there's a problem with this problem. You need to fix it. And I actually received patches from at least one student for changes to the text for me to integrate. It was great. Talk about education. That is participation right there. But that was so neat to experience. And we're still using that text in our introductory course. Let's see, I've talked about Prairie Learn. For the future, I'm no longer teaching our base computer science course. I'm teaching the next one up from it. And I also teach some 400 level classes, 300, 400 level classes, but I'm also taking essentially what is computer science 2. And I found a textbook on Runestone, but it needed work. Everything does. And the professor who was maintaining that book is at a college, it's called Berea College in Kentucky. And she had fallen behind. She had tons and tons of patches from her students or bug reports from her students, and was having trouble getting them integrated. I said, well, let me tackle your backlog. So I started working with her because I really want, I took the advice of the teacher who used to teach our second course and used the textbook he recommended, and I hated it. The author, it's a well-respected textbook, but it is so dry and boring. I found the textbook that I'm now using, but it needed some work. And now I'm a major contributor to it. These things happen. If you touch it, you buy it, evidently. At least that's my experience. But what I want to talk about with this, it's written in a language called pretext. Neat thing about pretext is you can write it once in the pretext language, which is essentially XML, and it will produce HTML, which you can self-host. It can produce EPUB if you've got a Kindle or any mobile reader. Odds are it supports the EPUB format. It can also just spit out a PDF, all from the same XML source. You can host it on Runestone and also have the integrated problems with it. And what I'm hoping, and one of the promises of pretext, is I can build an accessible text. So we can include alternative text for images very easily. We can increase the size of fonts for folks who have minor vision problems, etc. So let me show you what it looks like. Switch to back to my here. And this book is actually self-hosted. It's sitting out in GitHub. And that's where my students access it. This is the book I'm using this semester. And it gets organized very nicely. I think it actually looks pretty nice. And for folks who do any kind of math, it supports doing math jacks on the back end. So you can format mathematics as if you were doing it in LaTeX. If that's complete gibberish to you, don't worry. Mathematicians will know what I'm talking about, because this is kind of the standard format for doing mathematics. Let's see, I think. So one of my projects right now is taking the Think CPP textbook, the Think Like Computer Science, the intro textbook, and converting it to pretext. And actually, there's another professor at a community college who's done most of the work. I just need to finish integrating it. So I'm excited about that. So I'd love to know, what questions do we have?
Hi, Jason. This is Spencer Jardine, and I'm one of the librarians. I'm also on the OER committee.
Okay.
We were helping a faculty member or an adjunct instructor in the math department, and she was wanting to adopt or adapt OER into her text. What were you saying about what's the name of that? Is it a specific software that allows for the mathematical formulations?
That's just a part of pretext. So pretext is a kind of a file format. It is, you write XML and then a post processor turns it into HTML that you can put on a website or EPUB or PDF or whatever. And it's not specific to a specific platform.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, you don't have to have a hosting platform at all, other than just a web server you can dump HTML files onto. That's really a requirement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
The reference for that would, if you Google for pretext book, you'll find it pretty quickly. And worst case, email me and I will help you find it.
Pretext book. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Hey, thank you.
No problem. Let's see, were there any in chat? Oh, okay.
Thank you for your presentation, Jason. Are you familiar with the OpenStax and the textbooks I have at OpenStax?
I am.
Okay.
Well, at least roughly. Those look like textbooks that are kind of, they're more traditional type textbooks. What I was looking for is something where the website could track whether students have interacted with it and such. And that's, I couldn't get. The other thing I was looking at Runestone initially for is creating custom problems that could be automatically graded. It turns out you can do that on the Runestone platform. It's just kind of clunky. It doesn't work well. So I ditched that pretty quickly and started playing with PrairieLearn. But the OpenStax, I don't have anything against it, but it doesn't give me the ability to be able to track the student's progress through the book. That's really what I get out of the Runestone platform. But the second textbook that I'm using, and actually I could host the Think Like a Computer Scientist book just on a website. I could do that, but then I lose the ability to track things. but it's so I could exist without the Runestone platform, and then it would be more like OpenStax. But I really like that integration of being able to know how many of my students are actually doing the reading beforehand, or at least looking through it. Yeah, it's not a perfect measure, but it's better than nothing. Maybe not much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How did you come up across Runestone?
Googling.
Googling. Okay.
Yeah. I think I ended up on a website listing open source textbooks. And I think what I think I found, so the original author of the Think Like a Computer Scientist C++ edition stopped maintaining the book in like 2000. And a professor at UMich picked it up and converted it to the Runestone platform and had some of her undergrad students create the integrated problems for it. And that was part of that was part of her. Well, that was a big part. That was her. That was she got funded to do that work, and it was undergrad quality when I took it over. In other words, it wasn't great, but it was really nice, as I said earlier, working with students would come in and say, hey, I couldn't actually solve this problem because there's a bug in the problem. Like, oh, okay, let me go back to the book and fix it. But it showed that they were interacting with it. And that was really cool. But we probably fixed a couple hundred bugs that first semester, and it's gone down significantly every semester that we've used it. But I found it by accident.
Okay.
And now that I found it, I'm never leaving. You can't make me. So, were there any other questions?
Um, I guess a question I might ask is, can you tell us what feedback you've received from your students? Have they talked about the OER, and what are their thoughts about it?
So on the Think Like a Computer Scientist, we got generally positive things. Our first semester, I think we assigned a little bit too much work. So there were some complaints about the quantity of work that we assigned in the course. That's not really related to the material, but it took some getting used to and finding the balance between those automatically graded problems and then the size of our projects. The two were the projects were too big and there were too many of the automatically graded problems, but that's something we were easily, I think by midterms we had it about right, but we did get some complaints about that. On the quality of the text, haven't had any complaints about it. Particularly the Think Like a Computer Scientist it's a very bite-sized, and we followed along with it very closely in the classroom. So we were providing reinforcement for those who actually did the reading before they showed up. So there have been no real complaints about it, and who doesn't like free stuff? And my criteria for choosing open source materials, I'll choose the open source materials first if they're good. If they're not, it's not worth it.
Yeah, if the quality is good, that makes a huge difference. Do you know how much the textbook was that was used previously?
Let's see, we were using an older edition of it, and I want to say that edition was costing about $40. But this is a intro computer science class, and we would have about 120 students a semester. So that's like $5 worth of textbooks being bought every year, assuming everybody bought it, which many didn't. But I think I saw the statistics on the Open Ed Week from 2021 that said something like 62% of students don't buy it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Quite an interesting statistic. But yeah, that sounds like you're helping to save students quite a bit of money in the aggregate, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it doesn't cost us anything either. I would love to give back to the Runestone folks, and we as a university are not, except for my time, working on the book. But it's also kind of refreshing for me, we're using a language called C++. And that language does evolve over time. Like when I first took over the book, there were some anachronistic, styles change over the years. And it was nice to be able to, oh, well, that's wrong. Or that's no longer in vogue. Let's do it the new way and just update the entire textbook. And I didn't have to wait for anybody to do it. That is so nice.
Yeah, that does sound like quite an advantage. That's really
Yeah.
good. I was really excited, and I put this in the chat that I was pretty amazed that some of your students worked ahead and were actually contributing and helping. It sounds like um, it was quite a learning experience for them, and they got to contribute themselves. I bet that was rewarding for them as they felt like they were making a difference as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I encourage, although my students haven't taken me up on it this semester, I do have a link to where to submit bug reports for the current textbook that I'm using. Now, none of the students this semester have taken advantage of it yet, but a couple did last semester. All right. Well, are there any other questions? Doesn't look like there's anything new in the chat.
Okay.
So
Well,
I think,
yes, thank you, Jason, again.
no problem.
A great presentation, and thank you for audience for participating and for attending. I encourage you strongly to look at the other presentations this week and attend as many as you can. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.